Hey, Patricia.
Hello, Kim.
How was your weekend?
It was wonderful. I just got back from New York and just saw some great exhibitions.
Oh, cool. What'd you see?
I saw the Orphism show at the Guggenheim, and it was wonderful. It's masterfully curated by Tracy Baskoff and Vivian Green. And yeah, just a wonderful arrangement of artworks, of paintings. And so it was great. I was interested in this show because this was an international group of artists who happened to be in Paris during this interwar years, it's between 1910 and 1930. Its wider influence and repercussions are really not yet quite understood. I mean, not a lot of people know about this moment, this movement of Orphism. But at least in Cuba, I know that it had its echoes.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it was a short lived artistic movement that sort of spilled out of Cubism and Futurism and other tendencies and moved more towards this pure form of abstract art. In fact, the whole reference to the myth of Orpheus was about making a connection between painting and music as this pure art form. So it's sort of interesting also because its connections with literature.
Oh,
Yeah, through this idea of the myth, right? So painters who embrace this myth of modernity at the time, in a way, you can think of it as sort of saving the myth or the mythical itself. The myth as this sort of connection with the world beyond the visible, which is symbolically represented in the visual motifs of the Orpheus painters, such as the circle, the metamorphosis of color into light, and all of which seek to produce this spontaneity where again you have this myth of the modern as a formal rupture with the past.
interesting. And Tracy Bashkoff also did the Hilma af Klint show.
Right, which I happened to see at the Guggenheim as well. So this feels like a continuation of
Yeah.
her previous work. Honestly, this show fits so well in the space of the Guggenheim, which, as you know, has the spiraling architecture,
Which
the
is a
gallery
little
spaces.
challenging.
It is, and I'll be honest. There's some exhibitions that I've seen there that I haven't enjoyed as much. But for this show, I think it worked very well because of this already sort of implicit references to the circle and the spiral in the work of many of most of these artists.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, setting is really important. We went to see the Joseph Beuys show at the Broad Museum here in LA. And that was curated by Sarah Lawyer and Andrea Girodi. And my kid had this really good joke. Can I tell you?
Yes, please.
She said, "The boys are back in town." I
Oh,
loved it.
what a great,
Anyway,
what a great line.
so good. So then after that, we went to see a Deaf West Theater production of American Idiot, which was fascinating because this was a musical and the primary actor was a deaf actor. And so for every character, they had two actors. And you were focused on the deaf actor who was signing all of the songs. And then the speaking actor was not in the spotlight, but also on stage sort of nearby. And it was amazing. You could totally the acting was amazing. The emoting was incredible through both of them. And, some of these actors, they were singing while lying down or falling off a couch. It was pretty incredible. I was really impressed.
Sounds like a great play. I would love to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I really encourage you to see some sort of deaf production. It was really cool. But this is our first episode. Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Welcome to The Art Equation, a podcast from Now Be Here. I'm one of your hosts, Patricia Ortega, and our historian and independent curator.
I'm your other host, Kim Schoenstatt, a contemporary artist and organizer of Now Be Here, a directory of and for women and non-binary artists.
On this podcast, we have a little charla, a little bachipapo about making art and making exhibitions. We invite fellow artists, curators, archivists, and people from different areas of the art world to share their knowledge and their experience.
We are curious about what goes on in the day-to-day of arting. We want to talk shop, get in the weeds about what goes into art shows, talk with the makers and the doers of the art world. Welcome to The Art Equation. For our first episode, we should introduce ourselves, what we want to dig into, why we're doing this. What do you think?
Yes, let's start with Now Be Here, the platform we're launching this podcast through. What is it? Who founded it? And when? And all that good information.
Okay, so it started back in 2016 when I saw Revolution in the Making, abstract sculpture by women, 1947 to 2016. It was the inaugural show at Hauser and Wirth in Los Angeles. Hauser and Wirth in Los Angeles is so big, most people think it's a museum. That's how big this place is. So their little show of sculpture by women was actually kind of big, and they had this giant courtyard space. And I did a walkthrough of the show, and the curators were talking about all the other artists they could have had included, and I got a little frustrated because who was in the show were the people that I've been seeing over and over and over. And I just had this idea of like, what if we get everybody else in this courtyard and take a group photo? I turned to Andrea Stang, who was one of the people leading the walkthrough, and like really flippantly, I was not expecting her to say yes. I just said, hey, what if we do this? What if we get all the artists in this courtyard and take a giant group photo? And she just looked at me and goes, okay, let's do that. How's August? This was July. We jumped on it, we got to work, made basically a giant chain letter, and we were off to the races. So on August 28th, 2016, we had 733 artists gather in that courtyard at Hauser and Wirth, Los Angeles, and took what is now the largest group photo of artists in Los Angeles. The project then took on a little bit of a life of its own. It was very well received. We had coverage in all of the newspapers, LA Times, New York Times, blah, blah, blah. It was really fun. The artists who attended were really excited just to be in an all-artist space. That was actually one thing I didn't think about, was how important that space was. It then traveled to the Brooklyn Museum on October 23rd, 2016, where we had 578 artists attend. And that was just before the election in 2016 between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. So that was a really exciting moment. And then December 10th, 2016 again, it traveled to the Perez Art Museum in Miami, Florida, where we also partnered with the Girls Club. And there we had 303 artists attend, but it was also sort of during not a hurricane, but kind of hurricane adjacent, tropical storm. So there was a whole freeway that was shut down, so a lot of people couldn't come. But that was another really amazing one. The following year, October 25th, 2017, we did our final U.S. tour at the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C., where we had 465 artists from across the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area. After that, we had basically a list of the artists. Then I was getting feedback from curators saying, well, a list of 2,000 artists is no help. Like, we really need to see the work. We want to visually kind of scrub through and see who's doing what, and then be able to search by categories and ideas. And so when we're putting a show together, we can use this as a real resource and a usable directory. So we got to work. During the pandemic, we launched the directory. And when the directory launched, I realized, holy cow, I'm super over my head. I need to activate this in some way. I'm going to need another brain to kind of bounce this off of. So I called my old friend Taras and said, hey, you run a museum. Do you have any curatorial interns you want to toss my way? That's how we met.
Yes, that was actually the beginning of the pandemic. And at the time, yep, I was working at the University of Maryland Art Gallery, and Taras was my boss. And we had a show running at the time. It was called Across the Pane, curated by my colleague Abby Aaron. And it was about the life and work of Una Barnes, the American and openly lesbian artist, illustrator, journalist, and writer who was part of the European modernist avant-garde movement. It was such a great show, and Abby had done so much research. She had archival material on display, this rarely seen and quite strange and queer paintings, works on paper, from the newspapers she contributed to. And so 1 month into the opening, we had to close.
Oh, no.
And yeah, so we began exploring different ways to present artworks to our audience, right? And so a lot of great things came out of that difficult time. I mean, it was very challenging, but one of the things that came out of that was this collaboration with you and this invitation to join the team of Now Be Here. I think we wanted to engage artists, curators, and scholars in conversation. And so Taras, who knew you from LA, is our director here, so he connected us. But I was curious, how did you meet Taras?
Well, I've known Taras for so long. So one of his first jobs was working at LACMA, or the LA County Museum of Art. And we met there. And then he's also one of these curators who was an artist as well, or who is an artist as well. I will not put that in past tense. So he also loves to draw, and he's a drawer, and I'm a drawer at heart. And so we bonded over that, and we geek out over materials. And, every time we talk, he's such an interesting guy, and he's really open, and he's very interested in activating and saying yes. And so, he's a fun person to work with. I also did a show with him in 2016. So when he left LACMA to go to the University of Maryland Art Gallery, or the museum, I guess it's a museum, but it's like an old school museum, so it's still called an art gallery. He invited me to do a show there. So we did a show there and also at the Clarice Performing Arts. So that was fun.
Oh, wow, I did not know this story.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was the connection here. He's always connecting people, and
Yeah,
and you
totally.
too, and me too. So I think this was meant to happen, and it was the perfect project to work on during the pandemic too. I was stricken by the images on the New York Times article, the images from Now Be Here, right? This large group of women artists coming together in this photograph. It was incredible for me at the time to see this crowd of all women artists. I thought it was a very direct and very beautiful way to protest the inequity in the art world. So in a sense, I think it was a gesture, it was a statement, but it was also a collective work of art. This coming together to advocate for the work of women artists in a world that has historically excluded women from being acknowledged as creators, as thinkers. But it was also about solidarity and learning from each other and celebrating art too. So that was it. And then there was the Guest Curator Initiative, where we used funds to host a series of conversations with artists in the directory. And now that I think about it, that was also about connecting people and bringing them together. That is something we both share and enjoy, connecting things and people through conversation. I think about how much even your work is about those unexpected connections and juxtapositions. And well, now this podcast is about that too. So I am super excited.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it too. And thanks for mentioning all those really good points about the photos. The photos were really kind of that moment, right? It was this moment of connection, this private moment for artists. And it was a protest photo, right? You couldn't exactly say, well, there just aren't any women artists.
Right.
Like, guess what? They're right there. I think that is really the heart of why I wanted to do this podcast with you, is that we do like connecting artists and the art world and talking about what we do. And you and I are always like, but what about this? And how are you figuring out this? And how does this work? And let's figure out how to do this. And what if we did this? There's all these parts. And I don't know, I love this community, and I feel it's an important community that has a lot to share. Plus, it's kind of a nice build up to our upcoming 10-year anniversary for Now Be Here, which will be in 2 years in 2026.
So exciting. We will be celebrating together. I'm sure that's a great moment for Now We Here. But yeah, the podcast, the idea for the podcast, I mean, we reconnected recently, we were catching up. You were telling me about the 10-year anniversary and where you were going to take Now Be Here. And I had just gotten back from doing dissertation research in Paris, where I spent some time at the INATEC, the audiovisual section at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. And there I listened to tons of radio programs from the 60s and 70s and made me think about this renewed moment that sound media is having right now with the surging popularity of podcasts. Right. So it got me thinking about how for a while radio seemed to be disappearing or sort of falling into the background as it was being replaced by television. But did it really go away? Of course, technology has changed and audiences have also changed, but I was suddenly thinking that this moment, right, when an oral or sonic media landscape comes into focus, whether that is because it persists or comes back, the privileging of hearing, in a way, destabilizes or even interrupts the primacy of sight in our culture. And I felt that it's sort of a very rich space. So why not take Now Be Here there?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about why we're starting this podcast and what is the art equation.
We are the art equation, Patricia. That's
us.
Right. That's us. Any exhibition needs a curator or gallerist and an artist. It's always more than one. Even though the artist's name is this sort of like marquee thing, there's all these parts behind, right? There's so much more that goes into any exhibition. You have to be invited or put your foot in the door and force it to happen. But then you're starting to have a conversation with the curator or the gallerist. Then there's how to move the work. There's the art handlers. There's the installation people. There's the promotion of the work. There's inviting people to see the show, talking to the writers, talking to curators, talking to the public. There's the archivists who store and archive and make sure history is preserved. And then there's also the conservators who fix the work when it gets broken. So, I mean, I guess we've gotten in the weeds on so many of these aspects. And then there's also all of the stuff that goes into being an artist and all the stuff that goes into being a curator. One of the things I'm really interested in is kind of bringing to light all of these parts, because I think that sometimes it's a little opaque. It's a little hard for any normal person to walk into an art show. Let's take the Guggenheim show that you just saw, right? You walk in, you walk up the ramp, you see all these pieces. What you're not seeing behind the scenes is all of the stuff that goes into making that happen. And I like the idea of breaking down what goes into each of our roles in making an exhibition.
Yeah, exactly. And we both sort of bring in this experiences that we're eager to share. I mean, from my side, I'm excited to talk about art exhibitions, news, and events. We'll love to catch up with some of the artists we worked with and see what they're up to.
Oh, yeah, totally.
There are so many possibilities, really. What are you most excited about, Kim? What would you like to see happen?
I want to geek out a little bit about the practicalities of the art world. You know, the practical aspects for artists, like the dreaded admin time or, administrative time. Programs that can save artists time and money and help stay organized. Build on seeing what artists are up to. Like, you already started a program for Now Be Here called the Guest Curator Initiative. And part of that was to build scholarship for some artists who did not have a lot of scholarship. Let's check back in with those artists. Let's see what they're up to. Let's see what's happened. Some of the artists have done quite well. One of them just recently got the Anonymous Was a Woman award. So that was pretty cool. There's just so much. I want to talk with curators about interactions with artists and practicalities of working on the shows. I want to talk with writers about the same thing. Money can be an issue. Let's talk about galleries and the relationships with galleries and the relationship with patrons and collectors. There's a lot we can dig into. The art world's a pretty complicated place to be.
It's going to be interesting. There is a lot to discuss, so I am looking forward.
Me too. Okay, switching gears here a little bit.
Yeah.
We're going to do some rapid fire questions so that listeners can get to know us a little bit more. I can kick off with a pretty standard question. Where are you from and how did you get to where you are now?
All right. Let's see. I have to start at the beginning. I was born and raised in Havana, Cuba. I immigrated to the United States in 2007 after a 2-year hiatus in San Jose, Costa Rica, where I had the immense privilege to learn about the work of local and international artists and curators at what was at the time the MATC, the Contemporary Art and Design Museum, which is located in this great neighborhood called Barrio Escalante in San Jose and housed in the historical National Liquor Factory building, which is a very interesting place that dates back to 1856. And so that is when I started to consider a career in the arts, although for a while I wanted to study film. But actually, this interest in film didn't go away. I wrote my master's thesis about the avant-garde films of Nicolas Guillen-Landrian. He was an Afro-Cuban visual artist and documentary maker working in the 1960s. And that was at UT Austin, where I got my master's degree. And it was a great place to go because they have one of the oldest Latin American art programs in the country. In fact, Jacqueline Barnett founded this program, and her studies and publications in Latin American art and architecture are quite foundational to the field. And then I came to Maryland to continue my studies, and here again I've been involved with local museums through either internships or collaborations. But I'm curious about your story, Kim. Can you share a little bit about it, where you're from and how you got to LA?
Oh, yeah, totally. I grew up in Chicago. I went to the same school, Francis Parker, for my entire life, junior kindergarten through 12th grade. And it was a very small, very progressive school that focused on art. When I was in high school, I got a scholarship to the Art Institute for some classes. And so I went there and then I figured out that I kind of maybe didn't want to be at art school because I knew there was a lot more than I wanted to learn in the world. So I went to Pitzer College here in California in Claremont. And my first year at Pitzer was the Northridge earthquake and the Rodney King events. So that was a really interesting introduction to Los Angeles. But I loved it. I really liked everything out here. I loved all the people out here. And I was the, nerd of the art department. I just did everything that they needed to do. And one of my jobs was Eli Broad had just built us a building because his son went to Pitzer. And our first artist in the exhibition space was John Baldessari. And so I was tasked with driving from Claremont to Santa Monica to pick up Baldessari. I picked him up in my little Volkswagen Golf, and we had to open the sunroof so his head could stick out, and drove him all the way back to Claremont. And then basically I was his chaperone for the weekend. We kidnapped him for the weekend, so to speak. If he did not have a car, he just had me, his chauffeur, who he would call up and I would pick him up and take him places. And after the whole weekend, he just said, "Kim, you've been to every free meal. Do you need a job?" And I said, yeah, I totally need a job. And that was the start of my working for Baldessari. I worked for Baldessari for 20 years almost. Yeah, 20 years. And then left on my own in 2012. I had been working on my own work the whole time. And so when I left, I knew John was in really good hands. And then I could just kind of focus on my own work.
I didn't know this this part of your CV, of your experience?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wanted to touch on the value of mentorship a little bit too, because what I learned from John also was a lot of the practicalities of how to be an artist, the importance of community and the importance of having your shit together in a lot of ways. Like that's something that has been so important for me as an artist and an organizer is talking with other artists, learning from them, learning from writers, learning from curators. These are really important assets that we have within our profession, and I find that they're really open and interested in sharing.
Yes, agree. That is actually an interesting part of my professional and academic journey. I can think of one good example, an internship I did at the Blanton Museum of Art in Austin. This was back in the spring of 2017. I was the University Engagement Fellow, so I worked in the education department. This was an experience for me that kind of felt very useful. Like I was doing useful work because I was talking to university students and inspiring them to look at art. And many of them, perhaps it was their first time in an art museum. But it felt also really good to just activate the artworks, right?
Yeah.
To be in a dialogue with the artists. I have had many mentors throughout my life, not only in academia, but outside of it. And there is usually a moment when you find yourself not only learning from this person, but also in a way admiring them and
Yeah, totally.
taking a little bit of who they are and incorporating it into yourself, right? But I have developed close friendships with many of my mentors, and they are all part of this big constellation, or what I like to think is a sort of cosmic map of my intellectual journey. But I'm sure that's also connected to your experience working with Baldessari and doing your artwork at the same time, right? You had to wear a lot of hats.
Oh yeah, I mean, I wore like every hat. When I first started working for Baldassari, it was just me and him basically, and I was doing everything. I was doing the books, doing the archives, doing the filing, typing out the correspondence and faxing them because yes, we were fax back then in the 90s. But yes, a lot of hats. I mean, even in my own work, I still wear a lot of hats. Part of my work is deep research. There's also the aspect of getting projects done and out the door. Being an artist, a really big part is networking and making sure that I'm out and I'm seeing shows. I'm seeing what other artists are up to. I'm supporting them by going to shows. I'm supporting the galleries by going to shows. That kind of the community presence, being present within the community is a really important part of my being an artist. Having the idea is great. The harder part is getting it into the world. Like having a great idea is, I'm sorry to say, it's kind of easy. It's how do you parlay that into an actual piece, and then how do you communicate with others about that piece, and how do you get it into the world? And that's exactly why artists supporting artists is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've been kind of going on a little bit here, so I'm wondering if maybe we should start to wrap it up.
Yeah.
I think we've covered a lot about what we want to do with this podcast, things we have to talk about. Clearly, we're not going to run out of things to talk about. The podcast is just going to be constantly evolving, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that's the exciting part of it.
Okay, we did it.
Yay!
Can you believe it? Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Okay, I'm so glad we got to share a little bit about ourselves and let people get to know us a little bit more. As we muddle our way through this, we'd like to thank the people who have supported us and are making this possible. Thank you to Sky Park Tausig for being an amazing producer, Taras Matla at the University of Maryland Art Gallery, and Jonathan Fermansky for the music.
Thanks so much for listening. This is our first time recording, so you might notice that we're still working out some technology issues.
Exactly. So if you hear some glitchy sounds or volume weirdness, just know we're working on it. We're going to figure it all out. Our production value will only improve from here. Hopefully.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
We are The Art Equation. You can find us wherever you listen every other Thursday.
Thanks for being here with us. We'd really love to hear your thoughts. So please subscribe. And if you have a moment to leave a review, it really helps us out. We love the feedback. Talk to you soon here on The Art Equation. The Art Equation is a podcast from Now Be Here with support from the University of Maryland Art Gallery. Now Be Here is a directory and resource created by and for women and non-binary artists. You can find more information at www.nowbehereart.com.